Hello everyone, I am Mr. Night Truth. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and let's go down into the story.
Madeline Soto's 13th birthday had passed with quiet celebration. A modest cake with purple frosting still sat in the refrigerator, its candles bent where Jennifer had hastily pulled them out the night before. But this morning, the chair, where Madeline usually sat at the table, remained empty. The silence of the house pressed against Jennifer's ears. No shuffling footsteps, no soft voice asking for cereal, not even the creak of her bedroom door. Jennifer told herself not to worry. Teenagers had moods. Madeline had been retreating more often lately, hiding in her room with sketchbooks filled with dark trees and lonely houses. She would surface only for dinner, eyes distant, answers clipped. It was a phase, Jennifer repeated like a mantra, though a whisper inside her said it was more than that. By mid-morning, the mantra collapsed. The school called. Madeline had not arrived. Jennifer's mind reeled. She pictured the moment earlier that morning, Stephen, her boyfriend, jingling his keys, offering to drive Madeline to school. Normally, Jennifer handled drop-off, but she had been running late. She remembered how Madeline had lingered on the porch, how she had hesitated before sliding into the passenger seat. At the time, Jennifer thought it was just another sulk. Now every detail stung with new meaning. The secretary's voice over the phone was calm, but edged with alarm. She hasn't checked in for any classes. Are you sure she was dropped off? Jennifer gripped the counter, her knuckles white. Stephen had insisted he saw Madeline walk toward the gates. He had sounded so certain when he said it the night before. But certainty wasn't comfort anymore. It was a thread unraveling in her hands. She remembered Madeline's words days ago, whispered in the dark. I wish I could live in the woods. Nobody would find me there. Jennifer had chuckled tiredly at the time, dismissing it as dramatic teenage musings. Now, those words echoed like prophecy. That afternoon, she found Stephen in the kitchen, scrolling on his phone. They called from the school, Jennifer said, her voice taut. She never got there. Stephen looked up, brows furrowed. What? That's impossible. I dropped her off, right at the front. Jennifer's breath caught. Did you actually see her go inside? He shifted, setting the phone down with a clatter. She walked toward the building. I didn't sit there and watch her disappear through the doors, Jen. Maybe she skipped. You know how she's been lately. Madeline wouldn't skip, Jennifer snapped, anger sparking through her fear. Stephen exhaled, shaking his head. She's been unstable, writing weird things, drawing those creepy pictures. Maybe she wanted to scare us. Jennifer's chest tightened. She's 13, Stephen. Don't call her unstable. He muttered under his breath, something bitter she couldn't quite make out. The house seemed to shrink around her. The clock ticked in deafening rhythm, each second mocking her helplessness. Her phone buzzed on the counter, unanswered calls to Madeline's number piling up, each ring vanishing into nothingness. When Jennifer finally drove to the school, the parking lot was nearly empty. Children laughed faintly on the playground, their voices high and distant, as if carried from another world. The gates loomed ahead, silent and still. She imagined Madeline's slight figure stepping through them, only for the vision to dissolve into cold metal bars and a stretch of empty pavement. Her grip on the steering wheel trembled. She whispered her daughter's name into the void, but the wind carried it away. By nightfall, detectives were at the door. They asked questions Jennifer couldn't answer, questions Stephen brushed off with sharp, defensive tones. She repeated his words. He dropped her off, like a prayer, but doubt was already carving its way into her chest. Somewhere in her heart, Jennifer knew the story Stephen told was not the whole truth, and the cracks in his version of events were only beginning to show. Jennifer barely slept that night. Every sound in the house unsettled her. The groan of pipes, the creak of floorboards, even the steady rhythm of Stephen's footsteps upstairs. She sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee, replaying every detail of the morning until the hours blurred together. The detectives had promised to return for more questions, but their absence stretched like a noose tightening around her chest. She wanted to believe Stephen's words, but somewhere in the pit of her stomach, a voice kept whispering that something was wrong. By mid-morning, Detective Ramirez returned, calm but relentless. His partner stayed mostly silent, jotting notes while Ramirez's eyes scanned the room, sharp and calculating. Jennifer perched on the edge of the couch, her fingers twisting a tissue to shreds, while Stephen slouched in the armchair across from her. He greeted the detective with a smirk that looked rehearsed. "Let's go over this again," Ramirez began evenly. "You said you left the house around 7:30. "Yeah, give or take," Stephen replied, shrugging. "And you drove directly to the school?" "Of course. Straight there." Ramirez paused just long enough to let the silence weigh. "And you saw her enter the building?" Stephen shifted, tapping his foot. "She walked toward the gates. I didn't exactly sit there and watch her go through the doors. I had to get to work." Jennifer turned to him, her voice brittle. "Why didn't you tell me that before? You said you watched her walk in." Stephen's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward her before he forced a laugh. "Does it matter? She was there. Maybe she skipped class. She's been difficult lately. You've seen it too." The detective leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Here's the thing, Stephen. The surveillance cameras by the gate didn't capture your car at all that morning." A bead of sweat traced down Stephen's temple. He barked out a quick reply, too quick. "Maybe I dropped her off on the side, away from the cameras. She didn't want people watching her. Teenagers are weird about that stuff." Jennifer's breath hitched. The explanation sounded flimsy, and she could hear the strain beneath his voice. Ramirez scribbled something in his notebook, then asked casually, "And your phone? We'll need to look at your records." Stephen's fingers froze mid-tap. "Well, I actually reset it. Did a factory reset that morning. It was glitching, freezing up, needed a fresh start." The words landed like stones in Jennifer's chest. She stared at him, trying to comprehend. A factory reset meant everything. Gone. Messages, photos, history, all erased. On the same morning Madeline disappeared, Ramirez asked softly, though his eyes hardened. Stephen gave a half-hearted chuckle. "Yeah, bad timing, but it doesn't mean anything." Jennifer's hands trembled. She wanted to scream at him, demand the truth, but fear anchored her tongue. What if he was lying? What if he wasn't? Her world tilted, and all she could see was her daughter's empty chair at the breakfast table. Later, at the station, the interrogation room was as cold as it looked in movies. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing pale shadows across Stephen's restless hands. The mirrored glass reflected his figure back at him, distorted, fractured. Jennifer sat on the other side, watching, her reflection overlapping his. She searched for the man she thought she knew, but every nervous glance, every forced smile made him look more like a stranger. Ramirez's voice echoed through the thin walls. "Stephen, stories don't change if they're true. First you said, you saw her walk in. Now you say maybe you dropped her at the side. Which is it?" Stephen rubbed his forehead, his words stumbling. I just don't remember every little detail. You're twisting this. I'm trying to help." Jennifer pressed, her fist against her mouth, holding back a sob. The cracks in his story were spreading, and she could no longer ignore them. Doubt clawed at her heart, with every contradiction he made. That night, when she returned home alone, the house felt colder, darker. Madeline's bedroom door stayed closed, her absence screaming louder than words. Jennifer sat in the hallway, her back against the wall, her head in her hands. She had trusted Stephen to protect her daughter, but now she wasn't sure he had ever protected anyone. The next morning, her phone rang. Detective Ramirez's voice was steady but grave. "We found something. A dumpster near Stephen's work. We need you to come down." Jennifer's blood turned to ice. She clutched the phone tighter, her mind spinning with dread. Whatever was waiting in that dumpster would shatter whatever hope remained. Hope remained. Jennifer stood frozen outside the police station, clutching her coat tighter against the morning chill when Detective Ramirez's words replayed in her head. "We found something. A dumpster near Stephen's work. We need you to come down." The drive there was a blur, her hands stiff on the wheel, every stoplight dragging out the dread that churned inside her. When she arrived, yellow tape cordoned off a narrow alley behind a strip of stores. The smell hit first. Sour rot, damp, cardboard, the metallic bite of garbage left to stew. Officers moved with grim efficiency, flashlights cutting across the rows of bins until one of them called out. Jennifer's knees buckled when she saw it. A black trash bag pulled open to reveal a backpack she instantly recognized. Purple canvas, scuffed at the corners, the same one Madeline had carried every morning since the start of the school year. Her breath left her in a gasp. "That's hers," she whispered, though no one had asked. Her voice cracked as she clutched the hood of her sweater, her whole body trembling. The detectives didn't look at her directly, their focus fixed on the bag as gloved hands lifted it carefully, placing it into an evidence container. The motion was methodical, almost respectful, as if they knew this wasn't just an object. It was a lifeline. Inside, notebooks were damp and wrinkled, pens leaking blue ink across the pages. A small keychain dangled from the zipper, a gift from Jennifer on Madeline's last birthday, and its presence gutted her. She could almost hear her daughter's laughter as she tore open the wrapping paper that night, pretending to roll her eyes but secretly delighted. That memory stabbed deeper now, tainted by the sight of it buried in trash. A forensic analyst spoke softly, his tone clinical. "Backpack consistent with missing miner's description. Found with personal effects intact." He gestured toward another bag being opened. "We'll need to run fingerprints, DNA swabs." Digital devices recovered, though damaged. Jennifer barely heard him. Her mind spiraled into images of Stephen, his smirk during questioning, his hands tapping nervously on the table, his story shifting like sand. She wanted desperately to tell herself there had been some mistake, that maybe Madeline had lost the bag, that someone else had found it. But the weight in her chest told her the truth. This was no coincidence. The cracks in Stephen's story had become gaping holes, and now they were filled with her daughter's belongings. Later, in the sterile light of the station's evidence room, Ramirez laid out the findings. The bag links back to Stephen's workplace. Security cameras place him near the dumpster 2 nights ago, and our digital forensics team pulled fragments from his old hard drive. He thought he wiped it, but there's enough left to show disturbing activity. He didn't sugarcoat the words. Searches, messages, patterns of behavior that fit a predator's profile. Jennifer's stomach heaved, bile burning her throat. She pressed her palms against the table, shaking her head as if denial could erase the images Ramirez's words conjured. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't, she murmured. But even as the protest left her lips, her voice lacked conviction. The detective's gaze softened. "I know this is unbearable, but Mrs. Soto, you need to see who he really is." Tears blurred her vision. Memories rushed back in fragments. Stephen insisting on picking Madeline up alone. Stephen's temper when challenged. Stephen's charm that so often masked the unease she couldn't name. She had excused them all, desperate for stability, for someone to lean on. And now, staring at the evidence, Jennifer felt crushed by guilt. Had she delivered her daughter into the hands of a monster? That night she sat in her car outside the house, unable to step inside. The windows glowed warmly, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene, where every corner echoed with Stephen's lies. Her phone vibrated again, Ramirez's name lighting the screen. She answered with a shaking hand. "We've escalated the case," he said. "With what we found, this is no longer a missing person. It's a homicide investigation. Tomorrow, We'll be searching the woods near the highway. We believe that's where the trail leads." Jennifer closed her eyes, tears streaming silently. The word homicide lodged in her chest like a shard of glass. Whatever they would find in those woods, she knew, would destroy the last fragments of hope she clung to. The morning after detectives told Jennifer they would be searching the woods, she found herself standing among them as the line of officers moved carefully through the thickets beyond the highway. The air was cold, damp with dew, carrying the earthy smell of pine needles and rotting leaves. Jennifer's chest tightened with every step, though she stayed back behind the tape, clutching the sleeves of her jacket as if holding herself together. Then came the sound, a sharp call from one of the officers, followed by silence that seemed to ripple across the clearing. She didn't need to see to know what they had found, but when the tarp was drawn back, and she caught a glimpse of a pale arm among the twisted branches, her knees buckled, and the world seemed to collapse into a ringing void. The stillness of the woods, once alive with insects and wind, now seemed suffocating, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath in mourning. Jennifer's daughter was no longer just missing. She was gone, stolen, silenced, her life reduced to evidence under the harsh beam of investigative lights. The trial came swiftly, the courtroom stark in its contrast to the rawness of the woods. The fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, illuminating Stephen as he sat in the defendant's chair, shoulders slouched but eyes darting sharply, like a cornered animal. Jennifer sat only feet away, unable to look at him, yet unable to look away. Prosecutor Lane's voice cut through the stillness with cold precision, each word a blade. This was no accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated act, carried out by a man with a history he thought he could erase. Evidence flashed across screens, recovered messages, fragments of searches that betrayed his predatory nature, photographs that chilled the jury into silence. Lane's questions came sharp and relentless. "You claim you cared for her. Then why was her body discarded like nothing in those woods?" Stephen's jaw clenched, his responses fumbling, contradicting, his earlier arrogance stripped away under the weight of proof. Jennifer felt her body tremble when called to the stand. Her hands clutched the railing, and her voice wavered as she was sworn in. "Did you notice changes in Madeline's behavior before her disappearance?" The prosecutor asked gently. Jennifer's throat tightened. "Yes, she was quieter, withdrawn. She didn't want to be around him, but She faltered, tears spilling as she forced the words. "I told myself it was just teenage moods. I didn't want to see what was right in front of me." The courtroom was silent except for her breaking voice. "I failed her. I let him into our lives. And now she's gone." Her sobs echoed in the sterile space, and even the judge's stern face seemed to soften at the rawness of her grief. The defense tried to paint Stephen as misunderstood, a man caught in unfortunate coincidences, but the evidence weighed heavier than excuses. The forensic analyst's steady voice, the timeline of surveillance footage, the digital trail he thought destroyed, each piece stacked like bricks in a wall, closing in around him. The jury watched, stone-faced, as the portrait of a predator emerged with undeniable clarity. When the verdict was finally read, the silence in the courtroom was thick, fragile, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Guilty. The word rang out, echoing like a tolling bell. Stephen's mask cracked at last, his face twisted in rage and disbelief as deputies restrained him. Jennifer covered her mouth, sobs shaking her as relief and sorrow clashed violently inside her. Justice. Yes, but no verdict could bring back. The laughter that once filled her home, no sentence could restore the years stolen. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters pressed in, but Jennifer barely heard them. She stood still, staring at the horizon where the woods stretched in the distance, those same woods that had told the truth no one wanted to hear. She whispered her daughter's name into the breeze, a prayer, a promise, a farewell. And though the case had ended, the wreckage remained, carved into her heart and the heart of a community forever changed, forever changed. Kendra Hatcher had built a life that looked, from the outside, like the very definition of stability and success. At 35, she had carved out a career as a pediatric dentist in Dallas, the kind of doctor who children adored and parents trusted without hesitation. Her office was filled with drawings and thank you notes from her little patients, stick figures with huge smiles, often holding her hand. Friends described her as radiant, always arriving with a warmth that disarmed strangers. But what made Kendra's happiness most striking in those final weeks wasn't just her career, it was her heart. After years of searching, she had found herself falling into a new relationship with Dr. Ricky Paniagua, a respected physician who had once lived in the shadows of a turbulent romance. Ricky, careful and reserved by nature, was slowly allowing Kendra's optimism to soften him. To those close to her, it seemed that Kendra's life was finally aligning into something whole, something beautiful. On September 2nd, 2015, that promise ended. It was an ordinary Wednesday evening. The Texas air was heavy with late summer humidity, pressing against skin and clothing, as residents of the Gables Park 17 apartments moved in and out of the towering garage. Kendra pulled into her usual space, gathering her bag from the passenger seat. She had a date planned with Ricky that night, a casual dinner where they'd talk about their future plans, trips, work, and the small domestic details of a life that was just beginning to take shape. She never made it upstairs. As she stepped out of her car, a figure approached. The moment was fast, brutal in its simplicity. A gun was raised, and before she could scream or run, the shot rang out. The echo bounced through the garage, sharp against the concrete. Kendra collapsed beside her car, her purse ripped away from her motionless body. Tires screeched, and within seconds, the black Jeep Cherokee carrying the killer sped into the night. Later, one of the residents would recall the sound. It was like a firecracker, a woman told detectives. But then I heard someone scream, and I knew it wasn't fireworks. The garage security cameras captured fragments, headlights flashing, a shadow moving swiftly, the Jeep's outline. To investigators arriving at the scene, the immediate picture was straightforward. A robbery, turned deadly. Dallas wasn't immune to violence, and purse snatchings were common. The missing handbag only reinforced the narrative. Yet even at the very beginning, something felt off. Detective Martin Rivera, who surveyed the scene that night, noticed how quick and efficient the attack had been. This wasn't chaotic, he later said. This was precise. One shot, no hesitation. Whoever pulled the trigger knew exactly what they were doing. Ricky arrived soon after police secured the scene. His face, pale and disbelieving, twisted when officers told him the words he couldn't comprehend. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, not Kendra. You don't understand. She was just here." His grief was raw, immediate, spilling into the cool night air as neighbors looked on from their balconies. In that moment, Ricky was not a doctor, not a man composed. He was shattered. The woman he had begun to trust with his heart lay lifeless on the pavement below. By midnight, the garage was silent again, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Yellow markers dotted the concrete where evidence had been collected. The single shell casing, the scuff of a shoe, the faint streaks of blood. Kendra's car remained where she had left it, door ajar, a cruel reminder of how abruptly her story had ended. Detectives drove away with more questions than answers. If it was just a robbery, why did it feel rehearsed? Why, of all places, did this assailant wait in a private garage rather than strike somewhere less conspicuous? For now, the official line was simple: a woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But in the days to follow, that story would begin to unravel, thread by thread, as the shadows surrounding Kendra's death came into focus. And the first shadow would appear in the grainy footage of that black Jeep Cherokee. The footage became their first thread. After Kendra Hatcher's murder, Detectives combed through hours of surveillance from the apartment garage. What they found was not a face, not even a license plate, but a vehicle. A black Jeep Cherokee rolling in just minutes before the gunshot. Headlights dim, its driver careful not to attract attention. Seconds after the sound echoed through the concrete cavern, the Jeep was seen again, racing away. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Detective Martin Rivera and his partner began tracing registered Cherokees in the Dallas area, cross-referencing models, paint, and location. Within days, a tip came in from an unlikely source. A man named Jose Ortez walked into the station, visibly uneasy, and said the Jeep belonged to him. Only, he hadn't been behind the wheel that night. "It was my ex-girlfriend," Jose explained, shifting in his chair. She still had a spare key. "I didn't know she was going to use it for anything like this." His ex was Crystal Cortez, a 23-year-old mother with a restless energy and a reputation for drifting between jobs. She wasn't known for violence, but she was known for questionable decisions. The detectives paid her a visit. Crystal sat stiffly across the interview table, her long hair falling like a curtain over her face. She agreed. Yes, she had been driving the Jeep that night. And yes, she was in the garage where Kendra Hatcher was killed. But her explanation was quick, almost rehearsed. "It was supposed to be just a robbery," she said, voice trembling. "That's it. We didn't mean for her to die. I didn't even know the guy who shot her. He just panicked." Rivera studied her. The words matched the crime scene on the surface. Purse missing, quick getaway, victim shot. But something in Crystal's tone rang hollow, like a line learned from someone else. The detectives pushed. "Who's we?" Rivera asked quietly. Crystal hesitated. Her hands fidgeted, twisting at the hem of her sleeve. "Just someone I met," she murmured. "A guy. He said he needed help. He promised me money if I drove. I didn't know he was going to do that." Her story faltered under the weight of detail. The guy she spoke of was never named. The robbery had no clear plan beyond taking a purse, and the quick, single shot, calculated, precise, was not the behavior of a panicked thief. What Crystal offered was a surface. Detectives were certain there was something buried underneath. Back at the station, Rivera reviewed the caseboard. The victim, accomplished, respected, with no ties to the street crime world. The driver, a young woman with financial struggles, suddenly willing to throw her life into chaos for what? A handbag? A few $100s? It didn't add up. Detectives knew, almost instinctively, that Crystal Cortez was protecting someone. The way she paused before answering, the way her eyes flickered whenever Ricky Paniagua's name came up in conversation, it suggested a shadow hovering behind her words. Weeks into the investigation, a pattern of communication emerged. Phone records showed calls between Crystal and another woman in the days before the shooting. Frequent, urgent. The same woman had a direct link to Dr. Ricky Paniagua, the grieving boyfriend left behind. Her name surfaced quietly, almost like a whisper at first. Brenda Delgado. Crystal insisted she barely knew Brenda, but detectives now had a new lead, a name tied not just to the driver, but to the man who had been at the center of Kendra's blossoming happiness. The investigation shifted. By the time Crystal left her second interview, detectives were no longer convinced this was random violence. Her story, once presented as a tragic miscalculation, now looked like a mask. The real motive, they suspected, lay somewhere deeper, tangled in jealousy, betrayal, and a past relationship that had never truly ended. And as Brenda Delgado's name moved closer to the center of the board, the story of Kendra's murder began to take a darker, more intimate shape. The shadows in the footage were no longer just about a car. They were about a woman scorned. Brenda Delgado's name slipped into the case like a shadow at the edge of a photograph. At first, she was only a whisper in Crystal Cortez's phone records, a name detectives recognized faintly through the grief-stricken stories told by Ricky Paniagua. But when her presence was examined closely, Brenda emerged as far more than a passing connection. She was central, too central to ignore. Brenda had once been Ricky's girlfriend, a relationship that, by his own quiet admission, had lasted longer than it should have. She was charming in public, attentive in the ways that first impressed his family. Yet underneath, there were signs of something heavier, an intensity that Ricky had found suffocating. By the time he met Kendra Hatcher, Ricky had pulled away from Brenda, seeking stability where once there had been turbulence. For Brenda, that rejection was not just heartbreak, it was humiliation. Friends would later describe how Brenda never truly accepted the breakup, how she would appear at Ricky's work uninvited, or send texts late into the night filled with apologies, pleas, and veiled threats. One text, read aloud during questioning, carried a bitter undertone. "You'll regret replacing me so quickly. She doesn't know you the way I do." Detectives circled back to Crystal Cortez. Why would a young mother with no violent records suddenly become entangled in a murder? The answer revealed itself in fragments, coaxed out under the fluorescent buzz of the interrogation room. "Brenda, she just said it was about teaching someone a lesson," Crystal confessed, tears streaking her face. "She promised me money if I drove. $500. That's it. I didn't even want to, but she said nothing bad would happen." Her performance was convincing, almost persuasive, but the detectives had spent too many years reading between words. They noticed how her tone sharpened when Ricky's name surfaced, how her eyes hardened whenever Kendra was mentioned. Rivera described it later. She was calm, too calm, like she had rehearsed every word. But anger was right there, underneath. You could feel it. Piece by piece, Crystal filled in the gaps. She explained how Brenda had approached her weeks earlier, framing it as an opportunity for quick cash. She introduced Crystal to a man, someone willing to carry out the violent part of the plan. His name was Christopher Love, though in Crystal's first shaky statements, she referred to him only as Lamar. The puzzle was coming together. Brenda was not only jealous of Kendra, she had plotted to erase her. By the end of October, the investigation had shifted entirely. The evidence pointed to Brenda as the architect of Kendra's murder for hire, orchestrating every detail while keeping herself insulated behind others. Still, she walked free for the moment. Crystal's testimony painted Brenda as the mastermind, but the shooter remained at large. Detectives knew their case was only half built. To bring down Brenda Delgado, they would first need to find the man who had pulled the trigger. And soon, the name Christopher Love would surface, not just as a shadow in Crystal's confession, but as the hand that carried out Brenda's deadly contract. The name Christopher Love surfaced like the final piece of a puzzle. Crystal Cortez, under pressure and guilt, identified him as the man Brenda Delgado had brought into the plan. He was no stranger to violence, detectives discovered. A man with a history of drug dealing and firearms, someone who could be persuaded to kill if the price was right. For investigators, the confession gave form to the faceless gunman who had ended Kendra Hatcher's life in the garage. Christopher Love had pulled the trigger, but it was Brenda who had pointed the weapon. In November 2015, Love was arrested. The charges, capital murder and conspiracy, were read as he stood silent, jaw tight, eyes burning with defiance. To the press waiting outside, Detective Rivera made a brief statement. "We have reason to believe this was not a random act. This was a planned execution. We are pursuing all parties involved." The city listened. The public outrage grew sharper, more personal. Kendra's murder was no longer just about a robbery or a tragic miscalculation. It was a betrayal, rooted in jealousy, staged like a contract signed in blood. Meanwhile, Brenda Delgado felt the net closing in. Word spread that Crystal was cooperating, that Christopher Love's arrest had tightened the circle. One day she was in Dallas, answering routine questions with a practiced calm. The next, she was gone. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the case. She had fled to Mexico, vanishing across the border with the kind of audacity that mocked both the grief of Kendra's family and the efforts of law enforcement. The FBI placed her on its most wanted list, describing her as armed with manipulation, not weapons. For 7 months, Brenda lived as a fugitive. In Dallas, the pressure mounted. Ricky Paniagua struggled silently under the weight of it all. He had moved forward with Kendra, only to see her cut down by the ghost of his past. "I never imagined she'd still be controlling my life like this," he told a friend. "Even after I left her, she found a way to take everything." Kendra's family attended hearings, waiting for the day Brenda would face them in court. Their grief hardened into determination. Justice was slow, but it would come. It came in April 2016. Brenda Delgado was captured in Torreon, Mexico, her life as a fugitive cut short by coordinated US-Mexican law enforcement. When she was extradited, she arrived in shackles, her once polished composure fractured by months of running. Cameras flashed as she was led into custody. This time there was no smile, no denial, only silence. The trial became a public reckoning. Crystal Cortez took the stand, voice shaking as she recounted how Brenda had lured her in, promising money and downplaying the danger. She said it would be easy, that nobody would get hurt. I believed her. Her testimony tore through the courtroom, exposing Brenda as the puppeteer, the woman who had turned heartbreak into murder. Christopher Love's role was laid bare too. Prosecutors painted him as the gunman who ended Kendra's life without hesitation. Witness after witness confirmed his part, and by the end, the verdict was inevitable. Brenda Delgado was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christopher Love received the death penalty. The courtroom was heavy with conflicting emotions, relief, sorrow, and the faint echo of rage. Justice had been served, but it did not bring Kendra back. For Ricky, for Kendra's family, for every friend who had once described her laughter as the brightest thing in the room, the punishment was only a cold consolation. The wound would never fully close. Detective Rivera put it simply, this wasn't just murder. It was love, twisted into obsession, and in the end, it destroyed everyone it touched. Outside the courthouse, the city exhaled. The case had ended, but the story would not fade. It lived on as a warning of what betrayal and manipulation could become when unchecked. A reminder that love, when twisted by control, can sign contracts written in blood. Carly Gregg's teachers described her as the kind of student who made their jobs worth it. At 15, she ranked at the top of her class, a girl who seemed to float between AP courses and after-school clubs with effortless charm. Her essays drew quiet admiration in the teacher's lounge. Her science projects earned ribbons, and her smile, bright but restrained, was the kind parents loved to see in school portraits. On paper, she was flawless. But paper is thin, and it burns quickly. At home, behind the closed doors of a modest 2-story house on Willow Creek Drive, the cracks had begun to widen. Carly's mother, Ashley, prided herself on being a hands-on parent. She scrutinized Carly's grades, hovered over her study schedules, and combed through her phone looking for trouble. Ashley was not cruel, at least not in ways the outside world would notice. She was sharp, persistent, and relentless, a woman who believed the worst sin a mother could commit was letting a teenager slip. To her, Carly wasn't a child navigating the volatile mess of adolescence. She was a project, something to keep polished. The pressure pressed on Carly like an invisible weight. Teachers might see the neat notes and sharp answers, but they didn't see the nights when Carly paced her room, whispering arguments to herself, replaying each word her mother had thrown at her. They didn't see her scribbled journal pages, filled with rage in one line and self-doubt in the next. Her biological father, Mark, only complicated things. He called occasionally, sometimes from a bar, sometimes from a truck cab halfway across the state. His voice was warm but unstable, always circling back to how Ashley had ruined everything, or how Carly was smarter than both of them combined. Carly clung to those words, even when she knew they came dipped in bitterness. She wanted to believe him, because his praise felt like a balm against her mother's constant correction. The conflict at home simmered, often over small things. Clothes, left on the floor, unfinished homework, eye-rolling at the dinner table. But in Carly's mind, each fight stacked like bricks on her chest. Ashley rarely yelled, but her sharp voice cut deep enough to bleed. One evening in late October, the argument shifted from simmer to boil. Ashley had found 2 vape pens in Carly's backpack, slim metallic devices buried between a history textbook and a spiral notebook. She held them out like evidence in a trial, her face a mixture of disappointment and vindication. "Do you want to throw your future away over this?" Ashley demanded. Carly's throat tightened. "It's not a big deal. Everyone does it." "That's exactly the problem." Ashley's voice rose, brittle and sharp. "You're not everyone. You're supposed to be better. And if you think I'm going to sit back and watch you destroy everything..." "Maybe I don't want what you want," Carly snapped, the words spilling faster than she could pull them back. For a second, silence stretched between them. Ashley's eyes narrowed, and Carly felt the ground tilt beneath her. "You don't get to decide that yet," Ashley said finally, cold and certain. "Not while you live in my house." Carly stormed to her room, slamming the door with a crack that rattled the frames on the hallway wall. She threw herself onto her bed, trembling. The vape pens had been hers, yes, but to her, they weren't rebellion so much as survival. Something to slow her racing thoughts, to carve out a pocket of calm in a world where every breath felt measured. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to block out the echo of her mother's words. The house settled into a tense quiet. From the kitchen, Carly could hear the scrape of Ashley cleaning dishes with more force than necessary. Upstairs, the faint hum of her stepfather Heath's television seeped through the walls. It was the soundtrack of a household held together, by habit, not peace. Carly reached for her phone, her fingers shaking. She texted a friend. "I can't do this anymore. She doesn't see me. I hate her." Then she deleted the message before it could send. Hours later, she lay awake staring at the glow of the ceiling fan. In her mind, she replayed Ashley's face, the cold certainty in her voice, the look that told Carly her future wasn't hers at all. The more she thought about it, the tighter her chest became. Her father's words drifted back, whispered like a temptation. Smarter than both of us, stronger too. Carly sat up, her eyes wet, her hands clenching and unclenching. Somewhere deep inside, something began to shift, not in a sudden snap, but in a slow, grinding turn. Anger mixed with exhaustion, and exhaustion mixed with a hollow ache that no honor roll or science medal could fill. The image of Ashley holding those vape pens hung in her mind. It wasn't the pens themselves, it was what they symbolized. Control, judgment, the reminder that nothing Carly did or wanted belonged to her. The thought came uninvited, quiet at first, then louder. What if she wasn't there anymore? She shook her head, horrified by herself, but the idea lodged deep. Downstairs, the clink of dishes stopped. The house fell silent. Carly lay back down, staring at the ceiling, her pulse refusing to settle. Tomorrow would bring another fight, another lecture, another chance for Ashley to remind her that her life was not her own. But tomorrow, Carly decided, would not be like today. The night carried with it a stillness that felt dangerous. Carly lay awake long after the rest of the house had gone quiet. Her chest still burned from the fight, her mother's voice replaying like a cruel recording. "You don't get to decide that yet." The words coiled tighter the longer she lay in bed. Somewhere between exhaustion and rage, Carly stood. She moved with a strange calm, as though her body had already made the decision her mind couldn't yet articulate. The carpet muffled her steps as she crept to her mother's room. Ashley was sitting at the edge of her bed, still dressed, her phone glowing in her hand. The light framed her face in harsh angles, tight jaw, tired eyes, a mother replaying her own arguments in silence. She didn't look up until Carly spoke. "Why do you hate me so much?" Ashley frowned, lowering the phone. "Carly, it's not about hate. It's about saving you from yourself. The room seemed to shrink. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the faint tick of a clock, it all pressed in on Carly at once. She felt the weight of years of lectures, corrections, and punishments collapsing onto this one moment. Her voice broke. "I just wanted you to stop." Ashley sighed, as if patience could undo the knife-edge tension. "You'll understand when you're older. Right now, you just need..." The first shot cracked through the room like lightning. Ashley's words dissolved into a gasp as her body jerked, crimson blooming against her blouse. Carly's hands trembled, but her finger pulled again. The second bullet drove her mother backward across the bed. The third silenced the sound of breath, leaving only the ringing in Carly's ears. For a moment, Carly stood frozen, staring at the woman who had once braided her hair before picture day, who had taped her drawings to the fridge, who had told her over and over that perfection was the only acceptable outcome. Now she was still, her eyes glassy, her body collapsed against pillows that no longer belonged to the living. The house seemed to know. The walls absorbed the silence, heavy and accusing. Carly's pulse thundered, but her movements were strangely measured as she set the gun down on the nightstand. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from a friend. "You okay?" She didn't answer. The front door creaked. Heath Smiley, Carly's stepfather, had just returned from his evening shift. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door, humming softly as he placed his keys on the counter. The normalcy of the act clashed violently with the horror upstairs. Carly's breath caught. She picked up the gun again, her palms slick with sweat. "Carly?" Heath's voice echoed faintly as he climbed the stairs. "Everything okay up there?" He stepped into the hallway, and the sight waiting for him stopped him cold. Carly standing, rigid in the doorway of Ashley's room, gun raised, eyes wide and unfocused. "Jesus, Carly, what are you doing?" The second she heard his voice, the tension in her body snapped. A shot rang out. Heath staggered, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his shirt. "Carly!" His voice broke into panic. "Put it down! Please!" Another shot grazed, the wall beside him, splintering wood. Heath stumbled backward, adrenaline taking over. He bolted down the stairs, clutching his wound, fumbling for his phone. The 911 operator's voice cracked through the line before he could even breathe properly. "My wife's been shot! My stepdaughter! Oh God, she's shooting!" His voice shook, words tumbling too fast. "I'm hit! I need help! Please, hurry!" Carly's ears filled with the metallic ringing of the gunfire, drowning out everything else. She staggered back into her room, chest heaving, heart hammering. The air smelled of smoke and blood. Her phone buzzed again, another message lighting up the screen. What happened? She didn't reply. Instead, she grabbed her hoodie, shoved the gun into her pocket, and slipped out the back door. The night air hit her like ice, sharp against her burning lungs. She ran barefoot across the damp grass, disappearing into the shadows beyond the porch light. Inside, Heath pressed a towel to his wound, his voice breaking as he repeated to the dispatcher. "She killed her. She killed Ashley. She's gone." Outside, Carly's footsteps pounded against the pavement as she fled into the dark. Her thoughts were a storm. Relief, terror, disbelief all colliding at once. She couldn't erase the sight of her mother's eyes, or the sound of Heath's desperate voice. But the thought that haunted her most was quieter, sharper, sharper. It's finally over. Her phone buzzed one last time. She glanced at the screen mid-run. "Carly, talk to me. What's going on?" She ignored it, quickening her pace. Somewhere behind her, sirens wailed, faint but growing louder, chasing her into a future she could no longer control. The night swallowed her, but it would not keep her hidden for long. The sirens grew louder until they bled into Carly's pounding heartbeat. She had run for blocks, her hoodie clinging to her skin with sweat, her bare feet cut by gravel. But even she knew there was no escaping what she had done. A patrol car cornered her near the edge of a quiet subdivision, headlights washing her in unforgiving light. "Hands where I can see them." The command cracked the night. Carly froze. The gun weighed heavy in her pocket, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she raised her trembling hands as officers swarmed, pinning her to the asphalt. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She only whispered once, her voice cracking. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The story spread like wildfire. By dawn, news outlets had swarmed Willow Creek Drive, their cameras capturing the house with its porch lights still flickering, the police tape strung like a grim banner across the lawn. Reporters spoke of the honor student who snapped, their voices heavy with disbelief. Carly was booked at the County Juvenile Detention Center. Her mugshot quickly circulated on national television. In it, her wide eyes seemed lost, her hair disheveled, as if the weight of the night hadn't settled yet. To some, she was a monster. To others, a fragile girl swallowed by pressures too great to bear. Her trial began 6 months later, the courtroom packed beyond capacity. The prosecution wasted no time painting her as deliberate and calculating. They showed text messages Carly had sent earlier that week, ones where she joked darkly with friends about wanting her mum to disappear. They displayed the searches on her laptop, how to load a handgun, how long it took for police to respond to gunshots. This was no accident, the prosecutor told the jury. This was premeditated. Carly Gregg knew exactly what she was doing. Across the aisle, Carly's defense attorney rose with a different story. They described a girl unraveling under the crushing weight of parental expectation, struggling with undiagnosed bipolar II disorder. They brought forward psychiatrists who testified about her medication changes, her erratic moods, her frantic journal entries that read like cries for help. She was not in control of her mind, her lawyer insisted. This was not murder. This was a mental health crisis, a child spiraling without intervention. Heath Smiley, his arm scarred where the bullet had grazed him, gave testimony that silenced the room. She wasn't herself, he said softly, his voice breaking. I saw her eyes that night, and it was like she wasn't even there. But then, again, I also saw her raise that gun, and I don't know how to forgive either version of her. Carly sat at the defense table, her head lowered, hair shielding her face. She barely moved except to whisper to her lawyer. At times, her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Her friends were called to the stand. One of them read aloud the last text Carly had sent before the shooting. I can't take it anymore. Tonight, something's going to change. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution pounced. Does that sound like an accident? They demanded of the jury. The trial dragged on for weeks, experts clashing over what Carly had truly understood that night. Some called her a brilliant but disturbed teenager. Others labelled her manipulative, fully aware of her actions. The media feasted on every detail. Headlines screamed about the honor student killer. Talk shows debated whether society had failed Carly, or whether she was simply evil wrapped in a school uniform. The country was divided, half pity, half outrage. Inside the courtroom, however, the decision belonged only to 12 jurors. On the final day, Carly's lawyer delivered a plea. She is a child, he said, his voice breaking. 15 years old. If we cannot show mercy to a child caught in the grip of illness, then what does justice even mean? The prosecutor's closing was cold and precise. Ashley Gregg is dead. Heath Smiley nearly died. Carly Gregg planned this. Mental health cannot erase premeditation. Justice demands accountability. The jury deliberated for just over 8 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, Carly sat perfectly still. Her hands clutched the edge of the defense table. Her knuckles white, the foreman's voice rang clear, slicing through the silence. Guilty on all counts. A sob cracked from the gallery. Heath covered his face with his hands. Carly did not move. The judge's sentence fell like a stone. Life in prison without parole. For the first time since her arrest, Carly lifted her head. Her eyes scanned a room, past the jurors, past the reporters, past the strangers who had come to watch her fall. She looked to the empty seat where her mother once would have sat, arms crossed, expression firm. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, only silence. And in that silence, the story of Carly Gregg ended, not with understanding, but with a verdict that left everyone wondering the same question the title had asked from the beginning. Did Carly Gregg snap, or did she know exactly what she was doing? Aaron Quinn woke in the small hours to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the creak of the old floorboards or the hum of the refrigerator. This was heavier, measured footsteps pressing into the carpeted hallway of his Vallejo home. For a split second, half asleep, he thought he was dreaming. Then a sharp click cut through the dark, and the red pinpoint of a laser sight slid across the wall. The bedroom door burst open, shadows flooded in, figures in black, goggles reflecting faint green from their lenses. Aaron's chest tightened. Before he could move, one intruder's voice broke the silence, mechanical and flat. Don't resist. Stay calm. Comply. And no one gets hurt. Denise stirred beside him, confusion giving way to terror as gloved hands reached for her. The intruders moved with terrifying precision, not frantic but rehearsed, as if they had played this scene before. Aaron's pulse thundered in his ears. His mouth felt dry. He tried to stand, but a stun gun cracked with electric light, its warning enough to freeze him in place. Denise whimpered, her voice muffled as duct tape wrapped over her lips. The men carried a small speaker, and from it came a pre-recorded message, distorted but clear. You are under surveillance. We control your movements. Cooperate, and you will survive. Non-compliance will bring consequences. Aaron's mind raced. Who were they? Why Denise? He tried to speak, his voice breaking. Please, take me instead. Don't hurt her. The intruder nearest him turned his head, expression hidden behind goggles. The silence that followed was more brutal than words. Denise's wrists were bound, her ankles taped, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts through her nose. The room smelled of sweat and adhesive, the air thick with fear. One man pressed a cloth over Denise's face. Within seconds, her body slackened. Aaron lunged forward, but another intruder forced him down with the butt of a weapon. The crack against his ribs stole his breath. In less than 15 minutes, the house became a crime scene. Though no alarms had sounded, no neighbors stirred. Denise was lifted, limp, carried out into the night like a possession being taken. Aaron's hands shook as he stumbled toward the door, helpless, hearing only the fading crunch of tires on asphalt. Then, silence. He stood alone in the wreckage of their bedroom, the duct tape remnants on the floor, the faint chemical scent lingering. His body trembled, adrenaline mixing with despair. His first thought was to chase them, but his legs gave way beneath him. His second thought, the one that stuck, was that he had to call for help. Aaron grabbed his phone, fingers clumsy against the screen. He dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, words spilled out in broken fragments. My girlfriend, she's been taken. Masked men, lasers, stun guns, they drugged her. Please, you have to send someone now. The voice on the other end stayed calm, professional. Sir, slow down, start at the beginning. Are you saying there was a home invasion? Yes, they took Denise. His breath hitched. They said we were under surveillance. She's gone. As he spoke, Aaron realized how surreal his own words sounded. Goggles, pre-recorded voices, lasers in the dark. It read like a bad script, not a confession of reality. He gripped the phone tighter, forcing himself to repeat the details, even as he imagined the disbelief that must be forming on the dispatcher's face. By the time police sirens pierced the night, Aaron was seated on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to hold himself together. Every creak of the house now felt like an echo of the intruders, every shadow a reminder of Denise's absence. He told himself help was coming. He told himself they would believe him. Yet deep inside, a sickening doubt settled in. The strangeness of the attack, the precision, the theatrics, made it all sound implausible. And if it sounded unbelievable to him, how would it sound to the officers stepping into his home? As the flashing red and blue lights filled the street outside, Aaron braced himself. He thought he had survived the worst night of his life. What he didn't know was that the real ordeal, the fight not just for Denise's safety, but for their own credibility, was only beginning. The flashing red and blue lights painted Aaron's street in chaotic color. Officers stormed inside, their boots pounding against the hardwood as if chasing ghosts already gone. Aaron stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, trying to explain through ragged breaths what had happened. He thought they would believe him. He thought fear and urgency would be enough. Instead, he was met with narrowed eyes. "Where's your girlfriend now?" one officer asked, scanning the house. "They took her. Men in masks, goggles, weapons," Aaron's voice cracked. "They drugged her. She's gone." The officer scribbled something into his notebook, expression skeptical. To them, Aaron didn't look like a desperate man. He looked rehearsed. Hours later, at the station, Aaron sat in a narrow room under buzzing fluorescent lights. His shirt clung to him with sweat, ribs aching from the intruder's blow. Across the table, detectives leaned in with sharp questions. Why didn't you fight harder? Why is there no sign of forced entry? Why would professional kidnappers waste their time on you? Aaron's answers stumbled out, frantic. "I tried. I couldn't stop them. They had weapons. Please, they took her. She's in danger." But his pleas fell flat against the detective's certainty. Their eyes carried suspicion, not concern. Narration carried Aaron deeper into despair. Every passing minute felt like a betrayal. He had expected rescue, not interrogation. He was desperate for them to trace the car, canvass the neighborhood, start a search. Instead, they circled him like vultures, convinced he was guilty of something he hadn't done. By sunrise, the media was already at his door. Cameras snapped, reporters shouted questions, neighbors stared through curtains. Headlines spread faster than facts. Girlfriend missing. Boyfriend's story too strange. The story fed itself. A young woman vanished, her partner spinning a tale too bizarre to believe. It was irresistible to an audience raised on thrillers. Commentators dubbed it "Real Life Gone Girl" before Denise's name was even printed. But Denise was alive. She woke to a darkness thick as cloth. Because it was cloth, a blindfold dug into her temples, her wrists bound so tightly the skin had begun to burn. The surface beneath her was hard, cold, unfamiliar. She tried to steady her breathing, heart racing in the confines of her chest. Somewhere nearby, a low hum of machinery filled the silence. She shifted, and the restraints bit harder into her skin. Her voice came out as a broken whisper. "Aaron." No answer. Only the echo of her own voice in a space that felt too small, too closed. Denise's mind darted back to the night. Gloved hands, the chemical cloth, the terrifying weight of helplessness. Now, in this nameless room, she understood something more chilling. She didn't know if anyone was even looking for her. Meanwhile, Aaron was still trapped under the weight of disbelief. In the interrogation room, one detective leaned forward, voice low and pressing. "Tell us the truth, Aaron. We know she didn't just vanish. Did something happen during a fight? Did you panic?" Aaron shook his head violently, tears stinging his eyes. "No, you're wasting time. She needs help. Please." The detective's eyes hardened. "We've seen this before. The boyfriend thinks he's smarter than everyone else, tries to build a story, but stories unravel." Aaron's hands trembled against the table, his grief and fear twisted into rage. "You don't understand. They're out there. They'll kill her if you don't believe me." But his words fell into silence, his credibility crumbling by the minute. To the police, Denise wasn't missing. She was a plot point in a hoax. Across town, Denise lay still, listening. Footsteps echoed once, then faded. A door opened, then closed. She tested the knots again, but they held fast. Exhaustion pulled at her body, but her mind refused to quiet. She thought of Aaron, his laugh, his touch, the warmth of mornings they shared. She clung to the memory, not knowing that while she imagined his desperate fight to save her, he was being branded a liar. Description sharpened the divide. Denise in a suffocating darkness, Aaron under suffocating light, two captives in different cages. Back at the station, Aaron slumped forward, his voice nearly gone. He whispered, "She's real. She's alive. Why won't you believe me?" The detective pushed back his chair and left the room, leaving Aaron alone with his shaking hands and raw desperation. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward as reporters prepared their next segment. The Gone Girl hoax, they called it. And somewhere in the dark, Denise's muffled sobs filled a room no one believed existed. 2 days after she vanished, Denise Huskins was dropped back into the world as if discarded. The car slowed near Huntington Beach, 400 miles from home, and the blindfold came off for the first time. Salt air burned her nose. The crash of waves roared nearby. Her captor said nothing, only pushed her out, leaving her standing, barefoot on the pavement, dazed and blinking against the morning sun. Then he was gone. Denise staggered forward, skin raw where tape had torn at her wrists. Her voice trembled as she flagged down a passerby. "Please, I was kidnapped. I need help. Need help." Relief should have followed. Rescue. Comfort. Instead, disbelief arrived first. By the time she reached the local police station, Vallejo detectives were already on the phone, their tone clipped, their conclusion firm. Hoax. At a press conference. That afternoon, Vallejo's spokesperson delivered the blow publicly. Cameras rolled as the officer declared, "Mr. Quinn and Ms. Huskins have plundered valuable resources. This appears to be an orchestrated event, not a crime." Aaron watched the broadcast from his parents' living room, rage and shame battling in his chest. Denise, still reeling from captivity, now had to endure humiliation layered on top of trauma. The nation watched, smirking at the so-called Gone Girl of Vallejo. Narration cut deeper. They had been abducted by a man in the night, yet now they were prisoners of a narrative crafted by authority. Every article, every headline, painted them as liars. The more they tried to defend themselves, the guiltier they appeared. But the story refused to stay neat. 2 days later, the first email arrived. A journalist in San Francisco opened his inbox to find a message unlike anything he had seen. The subject line read, "You want proof." The body of the email was long, written in meticulous detail. The writer described the night of the abduction with clinical precision, how the intruders had used blacked-out goggles, the chemical used to sedate Denise, the pre-recorded voice message carried into the house. He included photographs, stun guns laid out on a table, the goggles with a single blonde hair caught in the strap, duct tape rolls cut at an angle. The journalist read in silence, hands trembling. Whoever wrote this wasn't guessing. They knew too much. Another email followed, more taunting. "You think it's a hoax. You think Quinn made this up. The police are incompetent. They couldn't solve a puzzle if I handed them the pieces. Watch them squirm while I tell you the truth they don't want to see." The journalist forwarded the messages to authorities, but the response was flat, irrelevant. Another trick from Quinn's camp. Denise sat alone, blinds drawn, watching her own face on the evening news. Reporters replayed her brief statement after being released. "I was kidnapped." They slowed it down, dissected her tone, mocked her calmness as though composure equaled guilt. Aaron sat beside her, whispering, "They'll see, eventually. They have to." Her voice broke. "What if they never do?" Description lingered. Denise staring at her reflection in the darkened television screen, her outline fractured by static. Aaron's hand over hers, both trembling. Still, the emails kept coming, each one more damning. They revealed patterns of surveillance, evidence caches, even psychological reasoning behind the abduction. The abductor wanted recognition, not just for the crime, but for outsmarting everyone tasked with solving it. And yet, the louder the truth screamed, the more the system dismissed it. Vallejo police doubled down, refusing to admit error. To acknowledge the emails as real would mean admitting their investigation had been disastrously wrong from the start. So Denise remained branded as a liar, Aaron as a co-conspirator. The kidnapper, meanwhile, remained in the shadows, mocking them all. What none of them knew was that the shadows wouldn't stay quiet forever. In a nearby city, the intruder was already planning his next move, a mistake waiting to happen, a thread waiting to unravel. In the weeks that followed, Denise and Aaron lived under a cloud of suspicion. Headlines still called it the Gone Girl hoax, and Vallejo police refused to back down. But while their reputations were dismantled in public, the man responsible for the nightmare was already stalking new victims. One summer night in Dublin, California, another couple awoke to a sound that would never leave them. The rush of footsteps, the sudden glow of a laser sight cutting through the dark. The attack unfolded with the same choreography as Aaron and Denise's. Goggles, duct tape, threats whispered in distorted tones. But this time, fate intervened. As the intruder fled, something small slipped from his pocket and landed in the grass. A phone. Investigators seized it, scrolling through messages, contacts, and photographs that mapped out the life of the man behind. The mask. Matthew Mueller, a former Marine and Harvard-educated lawyer. A man once destined for prestige, now consumed by delusion and control. When police raided his cabin near Lake Tahoe, the truth finally spilled into daylight. Shelves lined with weapons, blacked-out goggles, stun guns, pre-recorded voice messages stored on devices. In a plastic evidence bag, detectives lifted a single long strand of blonde hair, the kind Denise Huskins had always brushed behind her ear. Narration revealed the bitter irony. Everything Denise and Aaron had said was true, every detail mocked, as fantasy was sitting in Muller's lair waiting to be found. For Denise, the vindication came not as triumph, but exhaustion. "So it was real," she whispered when the news broke, tears pooling in her eyes. Aaron held her hand, jaw tight with both relief and rage. The world was finally seeing them, but only after it had nearly destroyed them. At trial, Muller appeared gaunt, his brilliance twisted into pathology. Prosecutors painted him as a predator who craved power and enjoyed orchestrating control. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the courtroom echoing with the sound of a gavel that came years too late. Yet the sentence did little to erase the damage. Denise and Aaron had been forced to carry the weight of public humiliation, branded liars when they were victims. They turned to the courts again, this time to sue the city of Vallejo. The settlement, $2, $5 million, was more than money. It was recognition, an admission of failure. Description lingered on their faces as they stood outside the courthouse. Denise's expression was steady, though her eyes held the shadow of all she endured. Aaron stood beside her, protective but weary. Cameras flashed, but this time the narrative had shifted. They were no longer the villains in someone else's hoax. They were survivors. Still, beneath the victory, scars remained. Trauma left its mark in sleepless nights and sudden silences, in the knowledge that truth could be weaponized against them. Aaron once told Denise, in a voice low and raw, "They took you from me, then tried to take us from each other." She squeezed his hand, answering softly, "But they didn't win." The story of Denise Huskins was no longer just about a kidnapping. It had become a testament to the brutality of disbelief, the cost of being victimized twice, once by a criminal and once by those sworn to protect.